Morning. Let me get my chat up so that I can follow you. Today we're going to talk about why individuation is so important and how to do it. And so the first step here is so I can follow your questions and comments, I need to get my chat up on. Nope, don't want that. I need to get my chat up on my other iPhone so I can see what you're saying to me. And let's see here. I'm sorry, I'm just taking a minute to get uh, my own. I need to somehow. I need to find my own account so I can. Ah, there we are. Okay, I think I've got it now. Okay, sometimes these take a little bit longer than one anticipates. Let me move this camera a little bit in. Um, okay, so last night I was again having problems with my technology, so I'm still on my iPhone, but I do uh, have the chat up so I'm able to follow you. And today I want to talk about why individuation is so important. Hello, Senator Bush. Thank you. Good morning. Um, and so the first thing before I get into the passage that I promised to read 2 days ago, I want to read a short paragraph from this book, Man and His Symbols by Carl G. Jung. And Dr. Jung, very late in his life, had a dream. And that dream told him that he should get some of his information out to the public. And uh, therefore, he decided to have a book written which basically expresses the main points of Jungian psychology for a layman. And so he wrote one of the essays in that book. I'm going to read from that essay now. And this book is in two versions. It's in a hardbound copy, which may be out of print, but you can get some used copies from Amazon used. And I'm going to be reading from page 101 of the hardbound copy. And it's ideal to get the hardbound copy because if you get the hardbound copy, you will get the color prints with it. And that's very important because in the softbound version, the color prints are not as easy to see because they're black and white and it doesn't make a lot of sense. So I hope everybody's hearing me fine. And so this paragraph really sums up why individuation is so important to all of us and why what BTS has done in the last 6 years, but especially in the last week, is so important to all of us. And so this is only one paragraph, page 101 from the hardbound copy of Man and His Symbols. And so I'll just read this paragraph. As any change must begin somewhere, it is the single individual who will experience it and carry it through. The change must indeed begin with an individual. It might be any one of us. Nobody can afford to look around and to wait for somebody else to do what he is loath to do himself. But since nobody seems to know what to do, it might be worthwhile for each of us to ask himself whether by any chance his or her unconscious may know something that will help us. Certainly, the conscious mind seems unable to do anything useful in this respect. Man today is painfully aware of the fact that neither his great religions nor his various philosophies seem to provide him with those powerful animating ideas that would give him the security he needs in face of the present condition of the world. I know what the Buddhists would say. Things would go right if people would only follow the Noble Eightfold Path of the Dharma, doctrine, law, and had true insight into the self. The Christian tells us that if only people had faith in God, we should have a better world. The rationalist insists that if people were intelligent and reasonable, all our problems would be manageable. The trouble is that none of them manages to solve these problems himself. Okay, so that's the issue, and that's why it's important. Now, in reading the section I plan to read today, I think first of all you need to have a definite Dr. Jung's definition of God. And so late in his life, Dr. Jung did a definition of God, and it appears in a footnote in Encounter with the Self by Edward Edinger, a Jungian commentary on William Blake's illustrations of the Book of Job. And in that book, on page 32, it's a wonderful book. I highly recommend it. Dr. Edinger puts this quote from Dr. Jung. Jung is quoted as saying, quote, God is the name by which I designate all things which cross my willful path violently and recklessly, all things which upset my subjective views, plans, and intentions, and change the course of my life for better or worse. That's a lot to think about, and so I'll read it once more just so you can get your mind around it. God is the name by which I designate all things which cross my willful path violently and recklessly, all things which upset my subjective views, plans, and intentions, and change the course of my life for better or for worse. Okay, so the other day I read a passage from this book. I read it at the end, and this is Answer to Job by C.G. Jung. It appears in volume 11 of the collected works of C.G. Jung. And as I've explained before, all the paragraphs in Dr. Jung's collected works have been numbered. And the reason for that is there's so many translations and different versions and different printings of Dr. Jung's work that if you just refer to a page number, then nobody can find what you're talking about. Even I wanted to find the page from Man and His Symbols that individual quote was in, and I wanted to find it in the paperback version, and I couldn't do it this morning because that doesn't happen to be part of the collected works. And so what they did was they pulled a lot of different writings together. So Answer to Job is a thin book, which you can get individually from Amazon, but it begins with paragraph 553. So what that 553 means is it's paragraph 553 in volume 11 of the collected works, which is entitled Psychology and Religion, interestingly enough, as one might expect. So anyway, but I'm going to go back toward the end of Answer to Job, because there he gives us a very complete description of what individuation is about. So I'm going to read it through one time, and just think about this as a message to everybody: just grow up. Now, before I read that, I will look at your chats just for a moment and see where we are. And so if if others of you would tweet that this is on live stream now, that would be very helpful and draw some more people into the discussion. And so the fundamental message in these three paragraphs is paragraphs 755 or 745 to 747, three paragraphs, but it's 2 pages. And the fundamental message is grow up, okay? Just wake up and grow up. And he's saying that to all humanity because we have to wake up. And so here is what he said. Paragraph 745. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to read it once, go through it, and then I'm going to come back and try to explain it to you piece by piece, because it's pretty dense, as Dr. Jung's writing often is. And so, paragraph 745. Everything now depends on man. Immense power of destruction is given into his hand, and the question is whether he can resist the will to use it, and can temper his will with the spirit of love and wisdom. He will hardly be capable of doing so on his own unaided resources. He needs the help of an advocate in heaven, that is, of the child who was caught up to God and who brings the healing and making whole of the hitherto fragmentary man. Whatever man's wholeness, or the self, may mean per se, empirically it is an image of the goal of life, spontaneously produced by the unconscious, irrespective of the wishes and fears of the conscious mind. It stands for the goal of the total man, for the realization of his wholeness and individuality, with or without the consent of his will. The dynamic of this process is instinct, which ensures that everything which belongs to an individual's life shall enter into it, whether he consents or not, or is conscious of what is happening to him or not. Obviously, it makes a great deal of difference subjectively whether he knows what he is living out, whether he understands what he is doing, and whether he accepts responsibility for what he proposes to do or has done. The difference between conscious realization and the lack of it has been roundly formulated in the saying of Christ, already quoted, quote, "Man, if indeed thou knowest what thou doest, thou art blessed, but if thou knowest not, thou art cursed and a transgressor of the law." And that comes from an apocryphal insertion into the Bible, which is at Luke 6:4. Before the bar of nature and fate, unconsciousness is never accepted as an excuse. On the contrary, there are very severe penalties for it. Hence, all unconscious nature longs for the light of consciousness while frantically struggling against it at the same time. The conscious realization of what is hidden and kept secret certainly confronts us with an insoluble conflict. At least this is how it appears to the conscious mind. But the symbols that rise up out of the unconscious in dreams show it rather as a confrontation of opposites, and the images of the goal represent their successful reconciliation. Something empirically demonstrable comes to our aid from the depths of our unconscious nature. It is the task of the conscious mind to understand these hints. If this does not happen, the process of individuation will nevertheless continue. The only difference is that we become its victims and are dragged along by fate towards the inescapable goal which he might have reached walking upright, if only he had taken the trouble and been patient enough to understand in time the meaning of the noumena that cross our path. The only thing that really matters now is whether man can climb up to a higher moral level, to a higher plane of consciousness, in order to be equal to the superhuman powers which the fallen angels have played into his hands. But he can make no progress with himself unless he becomes very much better acquainted with his own nature. Unfortunately, a terrifying ignorance prevails in this respect, and an equally great aversion to increasing the knowledge of his intrinsic character. However, in the most unexpected quarters nowadays, we find people who can no longer blink the fact that we find people who can no longer blink the fact that something ought to be done with man in regard to his psychology. Unfortunately, the little word ought tells us that we do not know what to do and do not know the way that leads to the soul. We can, of course, hope for the undeserved grace of God, who hears our prayers. But God, who also does not hear our prayers, wants to become man, and for that purpose he has chosen, through the Holy Ghost, the creaturely man filled with darkness, the natural man who is tainted with original sin, and who learnt the divine arts and sciences from the fallen angels. The guilty man is eminently suitable and is therefore chosen to become the vessel for the continuing incarnation, not the guiltless one who holds aloof from the world, not the guiltless one who holds aloof from the world and refuses to pay his tribute to life, for in him the dark God would find no room. Paragraph 747. Since the apocalypse, we now know again that God is not only to be loved, but also to be feared. He fills us with evil as well as with good. Otherwise, he would not need to be feared. And because he wants to become man, the uniting of his antinomy must take place in man. This involves man in a new responsibility. He can no longer wriggle out of it on the plea of his littleness and nothingness, for the dark God has slipped the atom bomb and chemical weapons into his hands and given him the power to empty out the apocalyptic vials of wrath on his fellow creatures. Since he has been granted an almost godlike power, he can no longer remain blind and unconscious. He must know something of God's nature and of metaphysical properties if he is to understand himself and thereby achieve gnosis of the divine. Okay, so that was my first run through. Now I want to get some definitions here. So, in his book, let's see, do I have it here? No, I don't. But in the book, The New God Image, just a sec. Sorry, that can't have been good. Okay, hopefully I'll get my act together. Okay, so in the book, The New God Image by Edward Edinger, Dr. Edinger describes and explains 11 letters that Dr. Jung wrote mostly to theologians during the last 10 years of his life, particularly. And all of those letters appear in the appendix of this book, which is published by Chiron. And I have read all those letters into this YouTube channel, and you can find them under a playlist on the front page, on the home page, called Blunt Psychiatrist versus Theologians. And in there, Dr. Jung is very blunt about what psychology thinks about with certain words that appear in all religions. And so there's 5 of them that are important to understand in order to understand this passage. Okay, the first of these is God, and he says God equals the unconscious. So God is your unconscious, and it is also the collective unconscious. And if we make our unconscious conscious, then we know God's will. But if we don't, then God's will nonetheless has its way with us. For Christ, Christ equals the self. And that is, in psychological terms, the deepest archetype in the unconscious, the God image. And Dr. Jung, in one of his works, Ion, discusses this at great length, and we've had a seminar on that. Incarnation is integration. So incarnation means that you're bringing something into you and integrating it in your own life, bringing it into your own life. Salvation means individuation. So individuation, if you go through the process of individuation, then you will be saved, in effect. Okay, that's the point. And crucifixion means wholeness. It means understanding who you are, where you are in the whole universe, and understanding all the aspects of that, which is what Christ understood on the cross. And Christ was the God-man. He was known for having said on the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And that showed that he was actually a human being and reacting as a human being, but in all other aspects of his life and ministry that we know about, he was referring to himself as the Son of Man, which was a term used at that time. The Son of Man is used many times in the Bible, and especially in the New Testament, and especially by Christ. And the Son of Man at that time also meant the Son of God. And what we're talking about here is that we are all sons and daughters of God, and we all have a divine element within us, and that divine element informs us from a psychological point of view. And so, from Dr. Jung's point of view, I can't speak for theologians now because they have their own narrative. And one of the problems that we have with religions is that those narratives have been shown to be false time and again since about 1500, when the scientific method came through. So once Galileo looked in his telescope, he said, well, there's no God up there, and no one's ever seen hell down below. I mean, it would be hell to be there, but there's no people running around down there with Satan type thing. Not in the physical world, but in the psychic world there are. And so in the psyche there are. And what ancients understood, but many modern people have lost is the fact that heaven is here. Heaven is in the psyche and in the unconscious. It is not in the physical world, it's in the psychic world, which is one of the main teachings here. Okay, so now going back, I'll take a look at what you've had to say so far, and then I'll go through this passage that I just read so that you can see what I'm talking about. And, um, and so let's see. So Papalika says Jungian spirituality trumps religion for me. Absolutely. And it actually trumps all religions because Dr. Jung, as Dr. Edinger pointed out, and I'll put a link to Dr. Edinger's talk in the description of this video, as Dr. Edinger explained, Dr. Jung found the source of all religions. And um, so that source actually trumps all religions. Now, is there something wrong with all religions? Actually, no. They are all true, 100% true, as psychic facts. And they are true for the believers in those religions as psychic facts. And what they were is spontaneously developed ways of psychotherapy, basically. And that's what Dr. Jung explained, that the religions came up as grand schemes of psychotherapy, and at a time when there was no psychology. And so then Dr. Freud and Dr. Jung came along, and they started to talk about psychology and the psyche and the unconscious. Actually, it was talked about for a couple of hundred years before that. And and the problem with Dr. Freud's point of view is he couldn't get out of the physical world. He was totally committed to materialism, whereas Dr. Jung went back and did this research that told him that um, that all religions are doing their work in the unconscious. They're not doing in the psyche. Maybe you could make it conscious by individuation, but it happens in the psyche. And so he was explaining that. So Nicolo says, same, try expressing it to your mates though without sounding like you're cracked in the head. Well, that's what I'm trying to do now, Nicolo, so let's see how I do. Carlos, thank you, Skip. I've learned a lot from you in a short time. Center Bush, exactly trying to explain can be tricky. It's better to experience it if possible. And this is exactly what the Christian Church, which was the Catholic Church until the Reformation, has always tried to do, which is has always put the priests and the ministers between man and God. And and God is an actual experience. When you have a religious experience, you know. Okay, you no longer have to believe, you know. And those are hard to catch and they're hard to talk about. But amazingly, I've gotten two, or at least two, three, on video or still shots while I've been making this YouTube channel. And so if you go to a playlist called Breakthroughs to the Unconscious, in each of those videos, I talk about it, and you can actually see me have a religious experience. Now, you may not have the same religious experience, and in fact, one of those happened at the time that I was reading this exact passage that I've just read to you. And you can see me reading it in that version. And you see me begin with paragraph 746. And for 2 minutes, I'm just reading along. And then this event happens. And it was, for me, it was an incredibly numinous event. It was an event that no one in the world could have planned. It was impossible to plan. It came exactly between paragraph 746 and 747, exactly between those two paragraphs. And it shook me to my core because of its relevance to that exact moment. And I'll read that exact moment to you again, just so you know what I'm saying. But it's okay. But I'm not going to have a numinous experience right now. But it says, so exactly before paragraph 747, I hear four F-18s go over my house, and it's very loud on the video. You can hear it. What it is I live in Annapolis, Maryland, where the U.S. Naval Academy is, and when they have a home football game, the F-18s from the Naval Air Station down in Oceana, Virginia, come up and they fly over the stadium as a demonstration of Navy's dominance on the football field. And that happens every time there's a home game. But on this particular day, when I was doing the reading, I was not thinking of that at all. And suddenly, at this exact moment, these four F-18s flew over my house very loudly. And you can really see you can see the emotion coming up in me now, but you could see the emotion coming up because this is the next sentence. Since the apocalypse, which is his reference to World War II, since the apocalypse, we now know again that God is not only to be loved, but also to be feared. He fills us with evil as well as with good. Otherwise, he would not need to be feared. Okay, now, at the time, my unconscious told me that it was an act of God that those F-18s flew over at precisely that time. It was entirely impossible to plan that. Nobody could have planned it because you would have had to have four F-18s in formation and know exactly when to do that reading. It just never could happen. But anyway, the video of that is it's at the beginning of my reading of Answer to Job, and you can tell it because the thumbnail has the four F-18s in it. And just watch it for yourself and see what I'm talking about. But that is a religious experience. And once you experience it, then you know. You don't need to believe, you know. All right, so Miles says, this is mind-blowing stuff. All I need to do is quote this video going forward to explain to people why I am not a fool. Agatha Fry says, whoa, love it. Haven't checked in on live chat in a while, so happy to see your audience has grown. Thanks for sharing the love through the crucial knowledge. Ahmet says, I just hope there will be a video of this lecture because I'm in a hurry now. There will be a playback of this. And so, yes, it will be uploaded, Paul. Shaklan says, I think all the live streams have replays. Yes. Central Bush, Jin's song, Epiphany, could be his religious experience because of the realization he had in that song about loving himself. It's a beautiful song and made me cry. Namjung said it sounds like truth, and exactly. And Papalika says, numinous, a sense of awe and wonder, experience of the holy and the holy other. Yes, that's a dictionary definition. Some people would call it magical, and it is certainly mysterious. So in The movie Shakespeare in Love, there's a scene where Shakespeare and the what Geoffrey Rush played, I don't remember the name of that character, but they're walking along, and Shakespeare is worrying about getting everything together for a performance of a play. And Geoffrey Rush says to him, uh, "Don't worry, everything will be fine." And Shakespeare turns to Geoffrey Rush and he says, "How will it?" And Geoffrey Rush says, "I don't know. It's a mystery." And he says that 3 or 4 times during the movie. And he's referring to this magic, this numinous something that brings everything together. So whenever there's a concert, even when I'm doing this, something magical brings it all together at the right moment to bring you here, to bring me here, to let me at least set up so I'm somewhat organized, even though I'm still having a problem with my tabletop computer. And so it's a mystery how everything gets pulled together. And it happens, a lot of it happens from the unconscious. And so if you say that's the will of God, well, yes, it is. It is the will of God. And all right, so I agree with you, Senator Bush, about Epiphany, and I haven't even heard it, so that must be it. And Papalika says, "I'm sure you are right. Miles, look at the photo of Skip in the church at the Naval Academy. There is a strange apparition in behind him. Looks like a scared demon, just in my opinion." Well, actually, Miles, that demon happens to be the seal, the Great Seal of the U.S. Naval Academy. But anyway, that's a different story. Nicolo, cheers for the definition, Pep. The Alchemist's Daughter. Hi, Skip. Welcome. Papalika, I love how Skip cross references to films and books. It really helps contextualize the meaning. And Senator Bush, so true. He makes it easier to understand. Okay, so now I've caught up with your chat, so I'm going to go back and go through these 2 pages, almost sentence by sentence, so that you can be clear what is being said. So I'm working with paragraph 745 of Answer to Job by C.G. Jung. And it really talks about why individuation is so important. And if you don't individuate, you are going to be dragged into your future by fate. And it's precisely correct. Okay. Everything now depends on man. Immense power of destruction is given into his hand, and the question is whether he can resist the will to use it and can temper his will with the spirit of love and wisdom. Okay, so this is an incredibly important current affairs issue for us right now, because before the President of the United States came to power, he said a number of times, "Why don't we just use nuclear weapons to solve these problems?" And obviously, he was totally ignorant at that time about why we don't. And the reason why we don't is that since we first started to test nuclear weapons in the atmosphere one way or another, either at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but also many other tests in the atmosphere, scientists around the world have studied the impact of a nuclear explosion. And what they've finally determined is that if only 23 of the 10,000 or so that exist right now, but if only 23 of those were detonated in a battle, or even if it was a test, if they're detonated in the atmosphere, 23, it would destroy all life on Earth. And So there are very wise people in all countries that have nuclear weapons who know this, and so they have resisted the urge to actually use them. And of course, in mankind, there's always this urge if you build something, well, let's use it, let's try it out, let's see how it works. Well, we know how it works. We saw how it worked in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and we've seen how it worked in various tests in the 40s and 50s. And it's totally devastating. And as I say, it would put so much radioactive particulate in the atmosphere if only 23 were detonated that it would destroy the world. And so the point is that our leaders have to have enough knowledge to understand that, number one, and number two, to resist the urge to use these weapons. So, and that requires a spirit of love and wisdom. And because if somebody really evil said, well, just, let's just go do it, boy, oh boy, that's the end for all of us. So then he goes, he will hardly be capable of doing so on his own unaided resources. So you can certainly imagine that if our president had gone into power thinking that, he might easily have used some nuclear weapons. But he was aided, obviously, when he came to power, and when he was given the power of the nuclear arsenal of the United States, he was obviously advised and educated by very wise people about what this power means, what it really means. And it would mean not only the death of everyone, but the death of everybody at Trump Tower, too. And so now, evidently, since he hasn't used a nuclear weapon, we can assume that he has a little more wisdom. Okay, he needs the help of an advocate in heaven, that is, of the child who is caught up to God and who brings the healing and making whole of the hitherto fragmentary man. So you could say that the president was fragmentary in that time, and heaven being in the unconscious, very wise people have advised him and healed this idea within him, at least so far, and we certainly hope so, and we certainly hope that continues with Kim Jong-un and other leaders around the world who have access to a nuclear button. Then he says, whatever man's wholeness or the self may mean per se, empirically it is an image of the goal of life spontaneously produced in the unconscious, irrespective of the wishes and fears of the conscious mind. So what this means is that anything living, whether it's a animal or vegetable, knows how to become itself and knows how to become itself perfectly. Okay, so every oak tree knows how to become an oak tree, and they can all be recognized as oak trees, but there is no oak tree that's exactly like another oak tree. So we can recognize an oak tree without them being perfectly the same. The same is true of a tomato or a tomato, depending on which way you want to pronounce it. But a tomato is a tomato, and they're all different. And the same is true of a rose. A rose by any other name would be a rose. And so, but every rose is different. Every snowflake is different. Everything that's produced in all of reality in the physical world is different from every other one, but they're all, we can categorize them as something. And so that's where that comes from. And so the same is true of a human being. Your self, your unconscious, you didn't consciously do this, but yourself, once you were once you became a fetus, knew how to become a human being. It knew how to put your heart where your heart is. It knew how to put your lungs where your lungs are. It knew how to put your stomach where your stomach is. It knew how to make arms and legs and eyes and feet and every other part of your body. And it knows how to grow your hair today. All of those things happen unconsciously. And so the creating of a perfect human being is a process that's going on. But in that process, you're not exactly the same. And so, regardless of what your background is, your gender is, whatever, you're being made as a human being by this unconscious factor. Okay, by the will of God, you could say. Okay, and in some things, in your interactions with the outer world, this unconscious factor reacts to what's happening to you in your life, wherever you are. And so it provides what's called a compensation and other reactions to what's happening in your life, and it reacts to those in the form of dreams and visions, and it actually communicates messages to you. And this is happening 7 by 24 by 365. It just so happens that when we go to sleep, we move our conscious mind out of the way, and this process goes on, and then you can see the images being presented at certain times of the night in your dreams. That's how most people have experienced them. Now, when a when psychic energy develops strong enough, then all of a sudden, boom, you can have a vision while you're awake. And I've had many of these visions, and it can be quite unsettling. As many of you know, one time I literally had Mephistopheles plop down in the seat next to me in my car when I was going 65 miles an hour. And when that happens, fortunately, because of my study of Dr. Jung's work, I knew that Mephistopheles was a psychogenic entity, okay, that he had come from my unconscious. And it happened at a time when my daughter, I won't go into it in great detail, but there is a longer video on this on the website. So if you put Mephistopheles into the website search engine, you'll find it. But anyway, my daughter on one occasion said, "Dad, I'm sorry to say this to you, but I think you're going to hell." And at that moment, I dropped into hell. Okay, hell being in my psyche. And that night, driving away from this experience with my daughter, is when Mephistopheles visited. And so I cut the Faustian bargain, which was, I said Mephistopheles could have my immortal soul on my death, provided none of my daughters would ever think that about me again for the rest of my life. And as soon as I said that, boom, Mephistopheles disappeared. He was satisfied. That vision was satisfied. But he was very real, and I was traveling at 65 miles an hour, and if I hadn't had a call coming in, but I declined it. If I hadn't realized what it was, you can imagine people might have all kinds of events happening to them. And obviously, the church would talk about the devil, and then people would actually have experiences with the devil because these would be psychogenic visions. And so we have to understand these things. Okay, and so So the point is that there is in your unconscious an image of the goal of your development as an individual, and that is coming through regardless of your fears and your wishes. It's just happening. And I'll get back to that in a minute. Okay, it stands for the goal of the total man, for the realization of his wholeness and individuality with or without the consent of his will. Okay, so this is going on all the time. This is about fate. And if you're not conscious of it, then you're going to have things happen to you by fate. And you're going to get dragged along by fate. Okay, so the dynamic of this process is instinct, which ensures that everything which belongs to an individual's life shall enter into it. So what this means is, in your conscious mind, you may pray to God, and God may or may not grant your prayers, but when the football player points this way after making a touchdown, it isn't a magic puppeteer like Geppetto that is guiding him across the goal line, and then he gets his touchdown. And he could have prayed to that God all night long, and he wouldn't have made his touchdown. But what happened with that young man is that the God within him taught him what he had to do, and that meant hours and hours in the gym, days and days of jogging, and lots of football practice before he could get himself to the point where he could get across that goal line. And so then, yes, it is the will of God. And so anyway, and so it's instinctual. And so in the case of BTS now, their unconscious will is coming through them and manifesting as it has manifested. And that's the will of God too. And he goes on here and said, and whether or not you're conscious of it, it's going to happen to you. So obviously it makes a great deal of difference subjectively whether he knows what he is living out, whether he understands what he is doing, and whether he accepts responsibility for what he proposes to do and has done. So if you propose to do something that's antithetical to human life, you're going to have horrendous dreams because your psyche is going to say no, and you should expect that. And we can pray that everybody has a moral fiber there that would say no. But anyway. And okay, so the difference between conscious realization and the lack of it has been roundly formulated in the saying of Christ already quoted. Quote, man, if indeed thou knowest what thou doest, thou art blessed, but if thou knowest not, thou art cursed and a transgressor of the law. So this was a parable that came up in the Bible and it was in the Apocrypha, so it ultimately came into Luke 6:4. And what happened was that at the time of Christ, it was a violation of law to work on the Sabbath. And this man was working on the Sabbath when Christ came upon him. And so the point is, if he knew what he was doing, if there was a good reason why he was doing it, and his self had told him he needs to do it, then he is blessed. But if he doesn't have a good reason, then he's a violator of the law. Now, why? Because in every society we have laws. Why do we have laws? so that mostly we can live together in peace. Okay, that's what civilization is. And so we have laws so that we can have lanes and guardrails to protect our society. Otherwise, we might as well be Game of Thrones, tribal fights here, there, and everywhere. And so civilization was the creation of laws when you couldn't teach everybody all these laws, so you simply made and why they were there, and so you made laws so that you can't you'll be safe mostly. So example I use is there's a stop sign near where I live, and mostly there's no traffic on the road where it stops. And meanwhile, it's at an exit of a superhighway, and so there are many cars coming off the superhighway. You come to the stop, and if you do a full stop at that stop sign, you back up 20 cars, and you might cause accidents behind you by rear enders because people don't expect you to stop because they know there's not much traffic on that cross street. And I actually did on one occasion see a police officer sitting at the stop sign, and someone rolled through the stop sign, and the police officer immediately stopped him. Well, now, that is, that's the law, but every day on a daily basis, I know that if I come up to that stop sign and I don't see anybody coming, I better just keep going, because if I don't and I stop fully as you're required to by law, boom, I'm going to get hit from the rear. And so this is the explanation of this parable that Dr. Jung likes. Man, if indeed thou knowest what thou doest, thou art blessed, but if thou knowest not, thou art cursed and a transgressor of the law. And so if you know that, one fine day there might be a police officer there and you might get a ticket, but you still do it, then you're blessed. You still do it because you didn't get rear-ended. Okay. So before the bar of nature and fate, unconsciousness is never accepted as an excuse. So if you're unconscious, lack of knowledge of the law is no excuse under American law, and unconsciousness of anything that can happen to you anywhere in the world. If you're unconscious and something happens to you, you can't make the excuse, "Oh, I didn't know that." You have to know, and so that's what's important here. On the contrary, there are many very severe penalties for it, and so if you see a hole in the ground and there's a poisonous snake in that hole, if you're unconscious of it and you decide you're going to reach in, you drop a pen in the hole or something like that. So you reach your hand into the hole and you get bit by the snake. There's no excuse. I mean, you didn't know that there was a snake there, but that snake just gave you poisonous venom. And so that's the kind of severe penalties Dr. Jung is talking about. So hence, all unconscious nature longs for the light of consciousness while frantically struggling against it at the same time. And so we can see in Christianity, for example, some Christians are frantically struggling against the idea of understanding that God is here, not there. And so there's a frantic struggling against that idea, and there has been for 2,000 years. That's why the Gnostics were put out of business by the Catholic Church, and we mostly only know about them. And that was because the ministers wanted to intermediate between God and man, and they wanted to explain things to you, blah, blah, blah. But really, there is something to it, okay, from a psychological point of view. the ministers just didn't want the average people to know it. And so for 1,500 years, nobody questioned it. And so they took people out and burned them at the stake. They were apostate. And if they didn't do what the church wanted them to do. And so Galilei understood this. So in 1517, I believe it was, when he was hauled up before the Catholic Inquisition, he was required to swear on a Bible that the sun orbits the earth, which he did. And so that was Galileo knowing what he was doing and therefore being blessed, because he also knew that the Catholic Church kept good records and verbatim records, and that he knew that he was going to make monkeys of them for all time, which is what he did. And so if you want to read what Galileo said while swearing on a Bible, you can go read the Abjuration of Galileo Galilei. It's really quite funny in the context of the 21st century. And so he was conscious, but many aren't. Okay, now I'm going to go back. So that was paragraph 745. I'm going to go back and look at your comments now. And all right, so Miles says over 2,000 tests, we know what they do. And Nicola says, sir, could I get a link to the research on the nukes, please? Trust but verify. I hope you understand. So, Nicolo, I have never actually seen that. I've taken that at face value. But I imagine if you put it into Google, you'll find the answer. And so I'm sure you can find it there. I don't have a link to it myself, and I don't plan to do your research for you, but I imagine there is one. And if I'm wrong, by the way, please let me know so that I can change my story. Miles says on YouTube, there is a video showing the planet in a timeline of 2,000 tests by different nations since 1945. Centerbush, is there a way to channel or strengthen one's psychic energy? Certainly there is. One of the best ways is meditation. Papalika, have these visions come to you only since reading Jung? Skip, do you think psychic faculties have opened in you as a result of being on this journey of individuation? Papalika, I do think I may have had some visions when I was younger. And I had a lot of time to meditate because my father, being a naval officer, we traveled on very long trips. We would travel in the 50s from the East Coast to the West Coast, and it would take 10 days. And the children in the family would sit in the back seat and have nothing to do but, look at the ceiling. So those were long meditations. And I'm pretty sure I had some visions back then, but of course, I had no idea what they were. And I remember being in Kodiak, Alaska when I was 6 years old, and I had a vision of Santa Claus and his reindeer, but I was lying on my back in my bed, and I'm looking up at the ceiling, and I could see Santa Claus in the sky. And of course, I couldn't possibly have seen the sky because there was a ceiling of that building, even though it was a skid shack. It was literally a shack on skids that had a bathroom in it, and that's where we were living in Kodiak in those days. And but I know I remember that vision. I have a few others that I could talk about, but until I read Jung, I didn't really understand what these things were. And it's the reason why I often give people a warning that when you start studying archetypal issues and Jungian psychology, it can um, it can begin to have visions, and so you need to be aware of that. And I had it happen to me very strongly in 1993 when I had been reading the book Women Who Run with the Wolves by Dr. Clarissa Pinkola Estes. And I decided that I wanted to write a novel, and I wanted to write a novel about the life of a Japanese woman from age 15 to age 75 who becomes the first woman prime minister of Japan, something that still never happened. But but I wanted to write that novel, and so I started to think about that, and I started to think about that in connection with a little essay that Dr. Estes wrote in that book behind a story called Vasilisa the Wise. And in that essay, she provided the 9 steps for the development of intuition by women. And so I used those steps as a template for what I was going to write about this woman. And so the book is called Meiko, Meiko, Memoirs of a Woman. And what happened was that started off a visioning experience for me that lasted 8 months. And it would not stop until I completed the novel. So once an archetype gets constellated in you, it will not stop until it's played through. It's like putting a phonograph record on the phonograph, and it's not going to stop. And so women are very close to this because you know that once you become a mother, then you're a mother for life. And the archetype of mother and motherhood is going to play through your life. Men are not quite so aware of this as women are, but certainly the mother archetype is a clear example of that. And so, in the case of a visioning experience like that, which was constellated by reading these archetypal stories in Women Who Run with the Wolves, once the archetype started to play through, the archetype of those 9 steps, it wasn't going to stop until I wrote the novel. And I've put their videos on this YouTube channel that describe that experience. But when Dr. Jung had his visioning experience in the 100 years ago, he was practicing psychiatrist, so he knew what was going on. I had never formally studied psychology, although I'd been reading Jung for about 6 years at that point. And so I really did not understand what it was. And so this can happen to you, that you start having a visioning period, or you're highly motivated to do something creative, whatever it is, making a wonderful meal, or writing a novel, or writing a poem, or writing a new piece of music, or painting some magnificent painting. All those things come from the unconscious, if they're good, okay? If they're, when you're first learning, you do it very pedantically, and you're doing it very much at the conscious level. And I'll give you an example. There were 2 images of my parents when they were very young. One of them is my mother at age 18, and I actually put that as the thumbnail on one of these recent videos I've done for BTS. And so you can see that image if you just look at the BTS playlist, you'll see that image of her. And there was another one of my father when he was at the Naval Academy, and he's in his dress blue uniform and so on. And I wanted to see if I could draw those when I was trying to learn how to draw. And I did it very pedantically. I did this hatch thing like what you see behind me, and I tried to put the right shape of each piece of those paintings or those photographs in the right block on my sheet of paper. And as I was doing it very pedantically, suddenly something opened up to my unconscious. And for 2 hours, it just flowed out of me. And I completely forgot the hash marks. And I just went and drew the pictures. And that all came from my unconscious. And this happened late at night. And so it happened between, I'd started maybe at 10 at night. And I happened to be visiting my parents at the time. And it flowed until about 2 in the morning. When my mother came down in the morning and she looked at my two drawings, she was totally moved by my drawings, and she took the photographs off the wall and went and bought frames that would fit my drawings, and she put the drawings up on the wall. And so obviously something creative can come from your unconscious. Okay, so psychogenic what, says Nicola? Could you expand on that phenomenon? Well, by that I mean that the unconscious is presenting something to you, and there's psychic energy that's built up in it, and it wants it to get through. And so if you have a vision, this is your unconscious saying, "Whoom, pay attention to this right now." And so the examples that Jungian analysts refer to are Paul's vision on the road to Damascus as one example from the Bible, and Jacob fighting with the angel at the riverbank, and the other one that applies to all the Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, is Job's experience, because Job had many visioning experiences about Yahweh, God. And we can point to now Jung with his Red Book, because the Red Book is Dr. Jung's visioning experience. And Dr. Edinger talked about Moses with Al-Khidr in the Quran. And then there's also an example from the Bhagavad Gita where Arjuna has a visitation from Krishna during a battle. And so all of those are psychogenic experiences. And when they happen, you actually, that's a part of yourself, and you can actually converse with it. And so in the Red Book, Dr. Jung actually develops the concept of active imagination, which is not the topic for this discussion, but anyway, in active imagination, if you learn how to do it and to relax your mind so you can do it, then you can actually converse with these different parts of you, and they don't necessarily come up as human being style things. In Dr. Jung's visioning, he had a black snake, for example, and he had a conversation with the black snake. And so you can have a conversation with a chair in an active imagination experience. And so, Nicolo, I would recommend reading The Red Book by C.G. Jung. And Little Gumnut Mephisto's Waltz France Liszt is amazing. Okay, yeah, and I'm sure that probably emanated from his unconscious. Centrivish. What about past lives? Are these psychic memories or a deeper part of our unconscious? Well, I think the answer to that is probably both. For example, I had a visioning or a dream come visioning experience again when I was 6 years old in Kodiak, where we had gone to a movie, and this is at a time when it was all black and white movies. So this is late 1952 or early 1953, and it was a movie about like Jurassic Park. A dinosaur egg had been found, and a dinosaur had grown up, and it was raising havoc like Godzilla. And so the army had to be called out, and they had to find a way to kill this dinosaur. And so that constellated something in me when I was 6 years old. And so that dinosaur had looked like Tyrannosaurus Rex. But that night, I had a dream where I was looking out of my window, and outside my window, I saw this dinosaur that was had a neck that was 40 feet long, and you've probably seen pictures of dinosaurs like that at this point. Certainly, they were in Jurassic Park and other places. But at that time, dinosaurs were not popular, and I think today the reason dinosaur images and toys and things are popular with kids is that all kids have dreams and visions of dinosaurs, and maybe they don't know it, but if you then play with it as a little toy, then you're not going to be afraid of it. But in 1952 or 3, I had no such thing, and so I had never seen a dinosaur before. I had only seen that movie. I had never seen that type of dinosaur before. But lo and behold, that image was in my psyche. So that was an image that came down to me long before human beings ever existed, obviously. And and so some of these images go way back in our psyche, and so earlier memories can be I would think that all of us may have visions or earlier memories from traumatic experiences, especially from our grandparents and our near back relatives. But what I'm saying is that I had a vision that I clearly remember. It was a numinous experience, and it happened when I was 6 years old, and it was a vision of something that some ancestor of mine saw 65 million years ago or more. Okay, so that's what I'm saying. And so I've got strength. Hello, for me, it's equally important to have spirit of love and wisdom, not only in terms of how we impact society, but also how we impact ourselves. We may tend to forgive others, but be too strict to ourselves. And that's very true. And that's why one of the functions of religion is to forgive you and to get you to forgive yourself. Because if you keep blaming yourselves and guilt tripping yourself over something that you did and you can do nothing about now, you're going to constrain your life. And so that's why the Catholic Church, for example, has confession. And Dr. Jung wrote an essay called The Psychotherapist or the Confessional, or the Confessional or the Psychotherapist. We also may make a mistake, some actions as love to ourselves, but it's not really. So we need wisdom to understand what love to ourselves really looks like. And that's very true. And that's something that we all have to reflect upon. Miles says, I suggested to my daughter this morning that she start a BTS and Jung club or meet up at her high school. She thought it a good idea. Well, that would be terrific. And it would be amazing for young people to start talking about these things, which is what I think is going to happen. And it's going to make people much more conscious about psychology. And Centerbush says, I hope she is successful sending positive energy. Carlos, Skip, you are a true bridge to the Superman. Thank you, Carlos. I hope that's true. Dave, until we came across Kavanaugh, civilization was thrown out the window. Well, Dave, you'll find in session 3 of my reading group, which was in early August of 2016, I was talking about the election, and of course, it's no secret that I was not a fan of our president. But I said, it could be good because, and we just don't know, because if things go so bad as they seem to have been, and many of us feel that we've thrown out common sense and civilization. But that is the shadow being presented. And if you look at my Twitter page and my Facebook page, both places, you'll find that my background picture is a quote from Revelation. And that quote from Revelation is, I believe it's Revelation 12:12. And it says that, sometimes the shadow, the devil, breaks through and he has to be given room for a time. But then there will be an enantiodromia. And so we're seeing that just with BTS because American society, for example, has gotten hyper masculinized in the last 25 years because of sending so many young men to war. And so we have all these tribal attitudes and stuff, and that's primitive. That goes back to primitive man when we get so tribal, and so an enantiodromia will set in a tendency of things to become their opposites. And so if you had asked me 1 month ago if I thought that there would be a group like BTS, I would have said, not on your life, what are you talking about? But you have to know it when you see it. And so I'm so familiar with these things now that as soon as I saw what BTS is doing, I said, my heavens, this is the enantiodromia coming back. It's pulling culture and attitudes back from the brink. And as I said yesterday, if the young women are all become BTS armies, the young men are going to follow. Okay, and actually yesterday morning I saw a couple of videos which you can find on YouTube. I don't know if I don't have a link to them, but there was one, what was it called? Okay, it's called Guys React to BTS. And then, there's another one called Guys React to Jimin, who's one of the BTS singers, Part 1. Guys React to Jimin, Part 1. And if you haven't seen that, it's just amazing to see these reactions because these are He-Man type guys. And at first they go, what? And then after a while they're watching it and they find that they like it. And that's because they have the other side, the irrational side in their psyche. And so suddenly that irrational side is saying, hey, yeah. And one of these guys with a beard says, my left brain, which is my logical brain, the logical, rational brain, he says, my logical brain, my rational brain says, nothing there, nothing there. And he's very tense about it. But that's because BTS is all on the other side of the brain, on the right brain. And so it's a very good observation. So anyway, I've got strength in my own thinking about God. Before I knew these ideas of Jung, I came to a thought that God is love. It's a famous phrase, but suddenly I felt like this is the real meaning of what God is and what. Well, we need to get more into Jungian psychology because whenever there is love, there is also the power principle on the other as the opposite. And so we're currently seeing the power principle play out in American society. And now we're seeing the pushback, the collective unconscious pushback of that by the adoption of BTS as an example. What people look for because they want to be loved and feel protected by this love, and they look for it somewhere outside in religion. And this is why Kim Namjoon in his lyrics is talking about love yourself. We all need to first understand that we are the center of the universe, and then go from there. Dave says law and morals are not the same thing. Quite right, Dave. Law is like a wall, and the Chinese found out how great walls work, and our president is finding it out because, as I understand it, now drug runners on the border of the United States are using catapults. So what can I tell you? And but morals are definitely something else. Okay, and for those, we have to know how to test the spirits because we all have evil within us. We all have a shadow, and two streams of spirit come up from our unconscious, a good side and a bad side. And this is why in 1 John 4:1, the teaching is test the spirits. You have to, when you get suddenly you get an idea and it's an evil idea, then you have to think about that. You have to test that spirit and say, is that really what I want to bring into society, into civilization? Miles says, God image is crossing my path from day one. I was accidentally scalded as a toddler. I don't remember it consciously, but had dreams, and I think it impacted me unconsciously, surely. Nicola, law are more made morality is evolved. And then I've got strength. So BTS makes a great impact on people because they give love and teach us to love ourselves. So this journey to love helped me a lot, absolutely. And it's constellating a need that we all have, and Dr. Jung talks about it in this book. And so you can find a detailed playlist on this YouTube channel, which is for Answer to Job, where I literally read the entire book into the channel, and then I also read Dr. Edinger's commentary on Answer to Job, and I also did a 15-week seminar on Answer to Job. So all that is there. Sam, just dropping by to say hello. I really enjoyed your video, BTS Map of the Soul. Papalico, there are advantages to being bored. Laugh out loud. Mobile devices make daydreaming less likely today. I am exploring the use of active imagination right now and loving it. Thanks for your personal answer. We're all, what are we looking for? We're all going around, and this includes me and my wife, and we're highly educated, highly experienced, and we're all staring at our cell phones. Okay, so what are we looking for in there? We're probably looking for God. I mean, if you're young, you're looking for how do I live in society and get by, and and you learn that from your peers. So you learn, so your young people are focusing at their iPhones because they don't want to miss anything and not understand what's going on around them. And so what's happening though is that young people today are getting educated much faster than in my day, for example. And so you know, my desire to have psychology taught in the schools. We don't need that. It's coming right here. And Miles says, everyone, Skip has a treasure trove of free videos and images, blog posts, and quotes as learning resources available by contacting him, and I'm always happy to interact with people. I've got strength. People want to understand by others, but do they understand themselves? These types of discussions are so important, and that idea of meetup in high school is brilliant. Art is so important too, but at my school, nobody said what creating of something means and how it happens. I really thought we were supposed to draw like a photo camera. Well, that's the problem, and literally we've run art and music out of the schools, and that's based on very rational approach to education, both public education and higher education, and the result is we're killing creativity in America, and we need creativity no matter what we do. Okay, and so the fact that we're killing creativity, and very honestly, I couldn't get interested in art classes or music classes. Well, in music classes I didn't till the seventh grade. That's a long story. But in music, in art, I never could get interested, and I never understood why it was significant, and neither did my teachers. They didn't get it. And, so the point is not turning yourself into a camera, it's expressing what this image that you're trying to paint means to you, to your unconscious. But that was never taught to me in art, in any art class, including my adult education art classes. So they got all these little old ladies that are trying to turn themselves into a camera by painting a still life. And I said, no. And one of the leading, in fact, the leading impressionist artist in Maryland, whose name is John Ebersberger, taught me, don't use a brush, okay? Use a palette knife. And ever since he taught me that, I've never used a brush on any of my paintings. And it makes all the difference, because then you're not trying to focus to get just right. You're actually expressing something from depth. And I've got strength. And music class was boring and totally irrelevant. It gave me nothing in terms of personal development. I'm in some rambling mood. That's right. Great points, says Miles. Papalika, I've got strength. Now you know better. Pick up the paintbrush again. It will be exciting. Actually, pick up the palette knife. Don't pick up a paintbrush. If you're trying to do that detail, you're trying to do it from the logos side, and you want to do your creativity from the eros side. Papalika, we have the same happening in the UK. Skip, the shadow is rising, but it's just transparency, which is a good thing. The stuff that needs healing come out into the open, and that's what I'm saying about our current administration. The shadow is emerging. We're now seeing the American shadow in earnest, but it also can cause the opposite to start to move if we vote this group out. Center Bush, I love art. I need to start creating again. It really does give me a sense of joy and fulfillment. I'm blessed my girls go to performing arts and science magnet. Art is so important from a young age. And any of us, if we go, especially for women, if you go to an art store, but for men too, if you go into an art store, you may find yourself being attracted to these materials to do art. And if you are so attracted, then do it. buy something and start to work with it, which is what I did when I was 45. But for men too, you can be in the tools section at Sears, and you say, "Oh man, I'd like to have all these tools. If I only had these tools, I could do something." And so do it. That's what creativity is about. And so, buy yourself a lathe and start doing some turning, or buy a circular table saw and start making tables. Whatever it is, that's all creativity. And so you can really feel that at any sort of store like that, whether it's, a store full of machine tools or a store full of art supplies. You feel something from your unconscious that's saying, I want to do something with that. I want to do something with that. And maybe you put it off because you can't afford this particular piece of equipment, but just do. Okay, so in terms of me, my creativity right now is what I'm doing right this minute. And so even though I've had a few roadblocks in the last 10 or 15 days because I can't get my computer to operate properly for me. I thought I was there yesterday, but then it didn't do it again this morning. So I have to check. But in any case, even though that's an obstacle to me, I pulled out my iPhone and I started to uh, continue to do it, even though it's not perfect. It's not everything that I want it to be yet, but um, I've got strength. I just started doing my coloring notebook a couple of days ago to get some taste of colors. And, the best way to connect on that with your unconscious is take your colored pencils or your crayons or your watercolors, whatever you're using, and just look at a space in your coloring book and then let your psyche tell you, don't select the color until your psyche says it's that color. And you pull that color out and paint that. And then look at another space and do the same process. And what I found when I did that, it was extremely moving. I was painting probably a mandala, and after I did that for about an hour and the mandala started to color in, all of a sudden I had this rush of emotion, and I know my unconscious self was saying, yes, this is the way you do it. This is the way you get conscious. And what we're talking about here is the transcendent function, which Dr. Jung talked about quite a lot, which is getting between the conscious and the unconscious. And when you have that kind of an experience, it's telling you that that's something transcendent that's happening, and it's putting you in touch again with God. Peter says, one of Jordan Peterson's greatest insights, in my opinion, is his research into the relationship between personality and political persuasion. Okay, you know, um, he's probably right. I don't doubt that he's right. And also, by the way, I wrote a book called Political Psychology, New Ideas for Activists, and I published that in 2014. And you can find it under my name on Amazon. And but I do agree that personality type does apply to political persuasion as it does to probably every profession. Papalika, yes, I agree. BTS and Army lead a progressive new wave. Ironic that it happens within pop industry known for its fakeness. Um, well, it's not fake. Whatever it is, it's real, and it is influencing us at the unconscious level. And so, Little Gumnut, the pop industry responds to consumer demand. I dare say they're beginning to see the depth people are interested in. Personally, I've always liked pop music for escapist reasons too. Well, sure, we all have music that we love because it expressed a certain emotion that we were having when we were kids or whatever it is. Or, a husband and wife might say, oh, that's our song. That was the song that made them feel a certain way at a certain time. And that's why music is so powerful. Peter, I hope there is a potential there to help us move beyond petty partisan battles and have genuine conversations about the issues that concern us. Um, I don't know whether you're talking about Peterson or me, but I think there is ample talk about these things in my writing. David, they are fixating denial of a likely pending extinction. Um, okay, I'm not quite sure what that reference is. Little Gumnut, to me, music art is about reminding yourself of what's important to you. My favorite songs bring up desirable thoughts and feelings, yes, typically, because if they didn't, you wouldn't remember them. Papalika, I'd like to see Skip's paintings. Um, all right, let's, do I have one of my paintings here? Uh, well, I've put some of my paintings, you know where you can see some of my paintings? If you're a member of our Dropbox, um, you can go into a subfolder called the organizer's art or something like that. You'll find it. And in there, I've put several of my paintings. What I would warn you, though, caution you about, is that some of these have adult themes. And so if that will offend you, and it does include some nudes and so on. So if that would offend you, please don't go look at my art. But if you would like to see it, you can find it in the Dropbox for the general group. And if you're not in our Dropbox, you can send me an email to skip.conover@gmail.com or send me your email address through Twitter at skip_Conover, and I will put you in the Dropbox. I do require, actually, I don't require, Dropbox requires that they have your regular email address in order for you to get access. So if you're not a member of our Dropbox, there are many treasures in that Dropbox. And but as I said, if you go into my writings, including the writings I did under my pen name of David Garrettson, just be warned, they have mature themes. And a little gumnut says, so then it doubles as a form of indirect communication. This makes me feel this way. I'm sure it makes you feel similar. Yeah, I mean, that's what all art does, not only music, but, and I've got strength those. Yes, I'm trying not to think about colors, just feel them. And Nicolo says he'll let me know on the research. Well, so I've gotten through the detailed discussion of one of these three paragraphs. I apologize, but as you see, these issues are quite complex. And so what I will do in tomorrow's discussion at 10 a.m. Eastern Time is I will go on with paragraph 746 and to the extent possible 747, because I am giving a live session at 8 p.m. Eastern Time here in the U.S. That is the regular time for the Jung reading group, and we will be having the 123rd, I think, session of the group tonight. And you're all invited. It's going to be live streamed right here, same place. And generally, that's a general group discussion. We used to do it every week at Sammy's, but when I was laid up a couple of times to have my ankle and knee replaced, I started to develop an online following. So since my ankle was replaced, we've reduced our Sammy's meetings to once a month. So the next Sammy's meeting, where my local friends are in it, and that's been a very popular video on this BTS support playlist, but with over, I think, close to 3,000 hits now. And that was only last Monday. But this tonight, I'm going to be doing it from here. I will respond to your comments, and I'm not going to go on with this, though, because this is going to be for this group from on 10 in the morning. And I'll keep trying to do this on a daily basis if I can. But tonight we'll be talking about something. We've been trying to talk about psychology and alchemy, and again we get through about a paragraph a week, and we may have some interest in talking about BTS tonight. So if that happens, that happens. It's a discussion group, as we've been doing here, and I will react extemporaneously as I have been. And when I react on it extemporaneously, you know that it's coming from my deep unconscious, because I never know what I'm actually going to talk about in these sessions. And it just comes based on your stimulation and so on. So that will be tonight at 8 p.m. for 2 hours. And I still have something to catch up on for my advanced reading group that I need to get into last week's Dropbox. So I will be doing that this afternoon, but I won't be doing it live. And so, and that, if you're interested in our advanced reading group, please send me an email or a Twitter message, and I will get you into the advanced group. In the advanced group, we have now 32 sessions that are a seminar on ion researches into the phenomenology of the self, and we now have about 10 sessions already in on Mysterium Conjunctionis, and I'm expecting the Mysterium seminar to last about 1 year. So we're just at the beginning of Mysterium. But anyway, there's I would say there's 50 hours or more of advanced material in that seminar, which is for the advanced reading group. So if you wish to join it, you can have all this old material as well as what we're doing every week on Wednesdays at 1:30 p.m. That's our time for the advanced reading group live, and we do that through Zoom, so you won't find it here. It's held privately for the advanced group. So that's where we are. So I apologize for not getting into the other two paragraphs. I really wanted to do that, and I intend to do it. But I do have to move on because my weekly meditation group is every Monday at 12:30, and so I have to leave now in order to get to my meditation. And if you're interested, I'll see you at 8 p.m. Tonight, U.S. Eastern Time.